Hello everybody, Earth.Otherwise here, and welcome to Reiterated, where I take a look at a piece of media which seeks to teach us something about game design and iterate on the ideas presented. Today we will be looking at the Game Design Conference talk, A Narrative Approach to Level Design. This talk by Jolie Menzel proposes that the level is how the player interacts with the game and the narrative. This is, of course, a bit of an exaggeration, but it does bring to mind the fact that the level is most of what the player will be seeing and moving through. The first caveat of this is that if narrative is a big part of your game, it needs to be a big part of your level design. I propose something a bit broader. All parts of your game should support one another. The connections between the different parts of your game, the mechanics, the enemies, NPCs, level, and narrative, are almost as important as the individual pieces. For example, if you have Martian NPCs, then the game should be set on Mars, and it would follow that the enemies would be Martians, the levels would be on Mars, etc. Another example would be that if your gameplay was hack and slash, then your character should be given a narrative reason to do the aforementioned hacking and slashing. Don't think that just because your game doesn't have a story that you shouldn't have some sort of narrative in your levels. Always think of how you can interconnect and tell interesting stories with each part of your game. A quote from the video is, "We are always looking at our game narrative to understand how our mission and levels are going to flow. The level designer in a game is kind of like a camera director in a movie. The way a level is set up can give the player feelings. For example, in Gears of War, if you see a big room filled with chest-high walls, you immediately know that a fight is coming up. You can create these kinds of expectations in players, and you can subvert them. For example, if you wanted to create a release of tension after a long and stressful section, you might create a room filled with chest-high walls. The player is expecting a fight, probably a hard or stress-filled fight. Perhaps they are low on life and ammunition. Instead of a fight, you have instead a single creature bouncing between cover like a rubber ball, firing off shots that go nowhere near the characters, and spouting lines like, 'I will destroy you all,' in a high-pitched voice. The player has a little laugh and kills the enemy with leaves, only to find that the little character was guarding a bunch of health and ammunition. Tension released, a small joke had, and thanks mostly to the level designer who was given the go-ahead to create a fun little room to rest in." Jolie then gives us a few points about what she just said. In order to have a narrative approach to level design, you need to 1. Use story as the true vision for gameplay, 2. Treat games as a storytelling medium, and 3. Examine the themes of the story and express them through game design. Most of the rest of the talk is about taking an existing narrative property, like a movie, comic, or book, and turning it into a game. I'll note that we're only 4 minutes into the talk when this example begins. In reality, this talk could have been probably called How to Design Levels When You Have a Well-Defined Narrative. I'm going to try to summarize and generalize what Jolie says so that it's more useful for indie developers such as myself. She says specifically that some of what she talks about will be useful if you are creating a new IP, like if you have a mood board or specific inspirations. Now, I'm not sure about you, but some indie developers I know, and I personally, don't have anything specific that we're trying to do when we start out. Maybe we have a game that we wish to make our game similar to, or perhaps we have some mechanics that we like. Usually for starting indie developers, you have something like it's X but with Y added. That's not really clear enough for this advice to be overly useful. My suggestion, before you really get into the video and this reiteration, is to have a clear goal for your game story-wise. Either set a mood, like cosmic horror, for your game to revolve around, or get a fairly concrete story set up so that you know what beats your game is going to have. Once you have that, watch the rest of the video. It's really just one long example of how she personally interprets creating a game based on an IP. Personally, I didn't find the talk all that informative. However, it did make me think more about how my levels can inform the player of the tone and story beats of a game. This has been Earth.Otherwise, signing off.